Welcome to the Steady On podcast, where God's hard truth meets your hard story. I don't need to tell you that life gets hard. Life gets hard, really hard. But God's faithfulness is still active and alive in our hard. And these episodes are dedicated to remembering and claiming the promises of a faithful God. I'm your host, Angie Bauman. I'm a pastor and Bible teacher, founder of Steady On Ministries, and creator of the Step-by-Step Bible Study Method. But more than that, I'm a trauma and abuse survivor who carried a heavy weight of shame and worthlessness for many years. And I still struggle, but I live in much more freedom now because I know God through His Word and speak truth to the lies of the enemy with His Word. And that's what we do here. On Mondays, we take it in by studying the promises of God. And on Wednesdays, we live it out with teaching and testimony on the promises of God. So thank you for tuning in, my friend. You are the reason for this show. And I'm so very, very glad you are here. Let's get started. Hello there, friend, and welcome into an episode that made a huge impact on my heart. My guest today is author, teacher, and yoga instructor Troy Hadeed. I was fascinated by my time with Troy because he just walks to the beat of a different drum than I do. But as I sat and listened to him, I could feel his drum calling me to consider its beat. Troy lives in Trinidad and Tobago. He teaches yoga. His senior year in college, he spent a semester at sea that took him to 15 different countries. He traveled Costa Rica coast to coast on foot. He practices prolonged periods of silence. His life is so far from mine. And yet, I heard him speak about connection, identity, the Spirit of God present in everyone, the fact that breath is life, the challenge to make friends with our thoughts and emotions, and I realized, this guy gets me, not because he knows me, but because he knows God and he knows people, and he sees me for who I am, a child of the Most High. Our verse this week is John 1:12 from the NLT. But to all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. I think you're going to love Troy. I know you'll love his accent. Let's listen in. Troy, welcome to the Steady On community.
Thank you so much for having me, Ange, and thank you for your listeners for giving me this time and space. It really is an honor to be here.
Oh, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to talk with you because, as I was just saying before we pressed record, I feel like the way that you learn from and relate to God is so very different than mine. And so I'm excited to just hear from you. And I'm grateful for your willingness to share some of your experiences. And so I know you've had a lot of travel experiences and adventures. And I'm wondering how, as you've gone to a lot of different places, what is something that you have learned about how we're connected as people?
I could take that in so many different ways, but one thing I've come to understand, whether it be through traveling or through my yoga practice or whatever it is that there is an innate pulse, resonance, vibration of a human condition, of all of creation. And that pulse is God. God in itself is a divine agency that is everywhere. I've come to believe that there is actually nowhere that God is not. Even in the darkest places of our society and our world, I don't think there's anything as absolute darkness. And I think, if you even look at it from a physical standpoint, light was born out of darkness. But first there was darkness. There was that womb of darkness. And I think that pulse is what connects every living being, everyone. No matter where you go in the world, that pulse is community. That pulse is life. That pulse is the desire to love, And funny enough, recently last year, and I went into an experience of solitary darkness. And complete, absolute physical darkness. And one of the reasons, that experience on its own was profound and agonizing, but very profound. And a lot came of that. But one of the things that I recognize is this, and I think it's important here, it's relevant, is that I went into that room of absolute darkness because in my head I was like, okay, everything we know ourselves to be, everything I know Troy to be or Angie knows Ange to be, is in relation to something externally. Whether it be a family member, a friend, a wall, a chair, somebody else's opinion. We define ourselves by everything else that surrounds us.
Mm.
So I decided I was going to go into this experience and remove as much of the external as I possibly could. And then I figured that in that experience, I could get a glimpse, not just of who I really am, but I could get a closer glimpse to God.
Mm.
And I think the two really important things that came out of that, one of them is more relevant here than the other one, but I realized that our relationships define us. They are who we are. If we removed all our relationships, all our friendships, our family, then we would have a hard time trying to understand who we were. You know, that vibration and that resonance and that energy we share in our relationships actually makes us who we are. And if our relationships are carrying hurt and pain and jealousy and greed, then those things are things that are going to define us. You know, but if we can work on actively healing our relationships, making them more compassionate, more understanding, more loving, more forgiving, then that begins to shift the actual vibration and resonance of who we are.
I have so many follow-up questions to that, but I'm going to ask this one. So I think it's so interesting that you're talking about how relationships let us know who we are. And so I'm guessing that you've done some work on that. Have you had relationships that needed to have healing or have forgiveness in them so that you could be more of who you are or more better of who you are?
Yeah. At that point in time, I mean, I can think of one or two relationships that I would love to heal and have been ready to heal for a long time. But that takes
two
parties.
That's
sometimes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, and my arms are open and I'm ready. And when it comes to forgiveness, and here's how I like to define forgiveness. I think forgiveness, first off, is not dependent on an apology. An apology means that our forgiveness is somewhat conditional. And I don't believe love or forgiveness is conditional. Mm. I like to define forgiveness as believing that someone could be better and do better, even when they don't realize they need to be.
Mm. Say that again, if you will. Believing that someone could be better.
Believing that someone could be better and do better, even when they don't realize they need to be. Mm. Forgiveness is seeing the God that lives within someone, even when they don't see it. Mm. That's what forgiveness is. It's not like, you know, we always have this perspective of forgiveness where we need an apology or someone has to be sorry and that's not what forgiveness is. That's not what love is, you know? It's just really seeing someone. And I always say that I think part of what gets in our way of forgiveness is that we very, you know, you have in your, I know in your questions, you had all these questions about identity crisis, which I like to talk a lot about. But the identity crisis I always refer to is the one that tells me that this is my body and my name is Troy. It's a narrative we're told from the day we're born. You are Angie, this is your body. I am Troy, this is my body. That narrative from the very day we're born makes us separate. It makes us from each other.
From each other. Mm-hmm.
From each other and everything else around us, right? Now, what I believe I mean, and I know I can speak in language that will connect to you, Angie, even though it might be a little bit different, but I believe that each and every individual is a child of God. And I believe that I know that what begins to shape someone is their conditioning, is their experiences. And what happens is, as we start to attach to our own unique individual identity, we start to box everyone else into their identity. So then that creates more separation. Imagine, so much so that I'm sure we've seen it in the last few years everywhere. Even our opinions become part of our identity. So much so that if me and you have a different opinion, all of a sudden we're on different teams. And I feel like I'm being personally attacked and you're my enemy because you have a different opinion. And that's not true. Like, we're allowed to have different opinions. But I would invite people, in the practice, and I think within Christian realms too, the practice of yoga and within the West is highly misunderstood. But at the very foundation of yoga practice is realization with God. It's union with God. Whatever you believe God to be, right? Your understanding of God. And it's about seeing God in everyone and everything. And how different our relationships and our lives would be if we actually saw every conversation as one we were having with God. It would be very different.
Yes.
So what I invite people to do is, rather than see someone's conditioning as who they are, to see beyond their conditioning. They are not their conditioning. You could take, in the majority of cases, take someone that has committed the most inhumane crimes. And chances are, if you go back and you understand their conditioning and their upbringing and their childhood, and you put yourself in that position, you could have very well done the very same thing.
What you're talking about is in seeing God in others and seeing God in the conversations and the thing. This is how we live out the greatest commandment, to love others as ourselves. Yeah. This is how we love our enemies. This is how we offer forgiveness, right? And not seeing even the person necessarily, certainly not seeing the circumstances that hurt us or whatever, but seeing the God that is in all situations and in all hearts and in all people and in all conversations, and answering to that instead of the hurt or the fear, right?
Absolutely. Now, let me connect some dots here with forgiveness, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll try and put a pin in this here. You cannot convince me that I am my physical body, because I know that after I leave my body, the resonance and vibration of my actions, my thoughts, and my words will live forever. There's no end to that. When no one remembers my name, the impact I've had on people and how I've made them feel that they passed on to everyone else, that will live forever. So I understand that I am not my physical body, right? But get this, if I am not my physical body, then you can't do anything to me. I just sometimes, my feelings and my emotions will happen to become a casualty on your journey. Mm. I like to explain it like this, that everyone is walking their own curriculum. It's like school. And I am part of your curriculum, so much so that even my mistakes and my shortcomings, not only are those there to teach me how to navigate guilt and shame, but they might be there to teach you how to understand compassion and forgiveness. That we are so intertwined. But what I want to say to close this note is this. When we begin to see someone beyond their physical identity, and we begin to understand someone's conditioning, then forgiveness is no longer an option. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
It's inevitable if you understand that someone is not ever doing anything personally to you. They can't. And it is not actually them doing it. A lot of the time they aren't conscious. They don't know any better.
Or
You know,
how
and
what they've done impacts you or wounds you.
of course, and it's easy to say, point a finger at someone and say, you should know better. But what if they never had someone to show them better, or to love them better, or to guide them better? You know, I always say that the biggest privilege in our world is knowing what love is. And not everyone knows that.
Yeah.
You know?
So what do you think is a good way? Because when someone hurts us, it hurts. And we do have these feelings, right? And so for you, where do you put those feelings when you do recognize? Because I agree with you absolutely that there's something bigger happening. There is a lesson about forgiveness and love and compassion to other people. There is God in this other person. There is offering, giving them the benefit of the doubt, saying they don't even know what they're doing. All of that's true. And I'm still wounded and I'm still hurt. So what advice do you have? What do we do with that?
Well, I will, the first thing I like to say is to feel it. Because, you know, we have this thing in our culture where we love to go towards numbing and avoidance and lock up and pretend that we're okay.
We're fine.
We're fine. Yeah. But emotions are part of the human experience. They're there for a reason. They are our teachers. So I would invite someone to feel it. And then I would further invite someone to have a conversation. Because a lot of the time there is a misunderstanding. We assume we know why someone did something, and we assume they did it just to hurt us. But assumption is not knowing. The only way to actually know what someone's intentions were is to have a conversation. Someone may not actually even know they hate you. And on the flip side of it, you know, we have this thing, like if I hurt someone, they're now coming to me to tell me how much I've hurt them. Our reaction a lot of the time is to defend our actions, so defend our words. Or be like, well, I didn't do it for that reason, or blah, or whatever, right? To defend our actions and words. But here's the reality, for me at least. If I do or say something that hurts Angie, even if my intentions were 100% pure, and even if I believe that my words and my actions were in integrity and in alignment, I will still apologize. Because the fact is that maybe I could have said it differently. Or maybe I could have done it differently. You know, we have this perspective that apologizing means you did something wrong. And that's not the case. Apologizing means that maybe you could have done it a little bit differently. Apologizing means that you didn't mean to hurt someone and you're sorry you did.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know, we've come to adopt this view of right and wrong. And if something's not right, it's wrong. And that's not actually a case at all, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Talk to me about the way that you practice silence. I'm very intrigued by that. I know that you've had long periods of silence. Why do you do that? And what does it teach you?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I first went into 10 days of silence because I wanted to cultivate a meditation practice. I didn't have one. So I thought I would dive in the deep end. Now, so here's what I would say about silence. Your mind is the most powerful thing we have. In yoga, there's a teaching that says your mind is king of everything, but breath is king of your mind. One of the most moving discoveries for me was to discover, of course, I discovered how powerful breath was, and that my breath made me feel, when I would really practice yoga in a slow, intentional way and connect to my breath, it's almost like I would instantly feel more connected to God. And then I learned that the word spirit, like Holy Spirit, comes from the Latin word spiritus, and it means to breathe. And it just made so much sense to me that, we separate ourselves by all these things: race, religion, opinion, physical bodies, ancestry, blah, blah, blah. Breath is the one thing that connects every living being. And I'm not surprised that there is divine agency in the breath. It's the one thing that connects us to everyone and everything. Um, so you asked about meditation. I don't want to stray far from that. But breath was important, right? Because mind is king of everything, but breath is king of the mind. And, we have in Christian lineage and understanding, we have all these amazing stories about God speaking to people. A lot of them are from biblical times. I personally don't believe God ever stopped speaking to us, every one of us. I think we just stopped listening.
Yes.
And how I like to describe it is this: there's the voice of your mind. And the voice of your mind is the egoic voice. It's a voice that asks what if, what's going to happen. It lives in the past, it lives in the future. It worries about what everyone else thinks of us. It worries about how we're going to fit in. It worries about how we're going to make money, how we're going to survive. It has all these voices and thoughts that are overactive and revolve around the preservation of our own individual identity. But then there's the voice of the heart. And I like to say that the heart is tuned to the resonance of God. And that's where God speaks to us. Some people might call it intuition, you might call it gut feeling, people might call it whatever. But I believe that God speaks to every individual. But we need to be careful, because if the voices of a mind are too loud, we might mistake them for the voice of intuition or the voice of God. And if we don't have a relationship to the mind and the overactive thoughts of the mind, then we're not going to be able to hear the voice of God. For us to hear that very clear intuition, that very clear voice of God, we must have a relationship to our mind. And to me, that's what practices like meditation and yoga do. The very second teaching of the Yoga Sutras says that yoga is the quieting of the fluctuations of the mind. How much clearer does it get than that, and I think it is so important, because we have so many people in the world today who are suffering from anxiety and depression and have overactive mind. And we will never have a world that is at peace if the people within that world aren't at peace with themselves. And I just think practices like meditation and stillness and silence are so fundamentally essential. Jesus did so much of that.
Yes. Pulling away after a time of busyness. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So for the listener who is what I would call light years away from silence and meditation and yoga and some of the things that are such a regular part of your life, and people are saying, I know what my brain sounds like. I know it's craziness in there. It's distraction. And not, I put myself in that category so often, even though I'm getting better and I'm developing skills to slow myself down and to connect to myself and to God in different ways. But what would you say to the one that's like, I wouldn't even know where to start to do that? Where would someone start, Troy?
Yeah, I would say, here's how I like to describe a mind and a breath. First of all, the breath is king of a mind. The one thing that is going to tame your mind is just smooth, long breath. Breathe through your nose. Smooth, long breath. 3-4 second inhale, pause. 3-4 second exhale, pause. So I know we won't go into the anatomy of breath at this point in time, but think of your mind, and your breath, but think of your mind as an eternal marriage. but there's no separation and no divorce. It's you on your mind and your mind for the rest of your life. The one way to start to build a loving, holistic, nurturing relationship with your partner is intimacy. And I'm not talking about romantic intimacy. I'm talking about quality time.
That's right.
So how I describe meditation or is just being with your mind, just sitting with your mind.
And I think that's the scariest thing for some of us. It's the scariest thing for some of us. Yeah. To be able to be alone with our own thoughts. We push it. So we watch things and shop things and eat things and have conversations and make social commitments and load our calendar and work too much and all these things. I think so much of it is to avoid being with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to say that I'm not talking about time with yourself reading a book or scrolling Netflix. I'm talking about sitting with yourself.
No noise.
Yeah, no noise. And what I would tell someone is set a time on their phone. Start with 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. When you do sit, you don't have to wrap your legs up like an old yogi from hundreds of years ago. You could sit on a chair. But try to make sure that your hips are higher than your knees. You close your eyes and you sit. And just look at the mind. You know, people say all the time, I just can't shut my mind up. I can't do it. It's like, well, would you come home and tell your spouse to shut up? Mm-hmm. Probably not. You'll be kicked out of the house. So why would you tell your mind to shut up? Your mind's natural state is to create. We just want to be in relationship with what the mind is creating. We want to be able to nurture a mind and direct the mind, not be a puppet to mind. So it's really just, Ange, about sitting and looking at the thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, trying to understand where these thoughts are coming from. How are these thoughts impacting me? Because a lot of the time, the mind just wants to be heard. And the more you sit and listen to mind, the more you develop a relationship with it, the quieter it will become.
It just wants to be heard.
It just wants to be heard.
I think about that with a relationship with other people. I mean, sometimes with my husband, even my husband is a person who likes to fix my problems. When I when I express one of my problems, he wants to have an answer. But over time, we've been married almost 25 years. Over time, he's learned that sometimes a lot of time even. So I don't want an answer. I don't want you to fix it. I just want to have a safe place to say this, right? And it's almost like I think about that as you're talking about our own relationship with our own thoughts and our own mind, where our mind is just, it's like, I just want to be able to say this to you, you know, and it be okay, whatever I'm thinking. That's something that I'm learning in my life. Like whatever I'm thinking, whatever I'm feeling, none of that is wrong. Like, you know, I have decisions to make around all of those. Like you were saying, like if I'm wounded, the fact that I feel hurt, that's not wrong that I feel hurt. What I do with it, I have choices around that. Right. But just to feel it isn't wrong. And just to think it isn't wrong. And I don't need to be at battle with those things all the time. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about that. And it encourages me even more. I have this practice the last couple of years where we have a lake in the community that's about 2.2 miles. And there are times that it's almost like a discipline when I can feel myself getting anxious, arguing with myself in my mind, not having clarity, just some of those things. I'm like, what you most need is to get away from this desk and walk and not talk to anybody except yourself, not listen to anything except yourself. And it's so helpful to me. Like, it really is. It's something that I've begun to practice that it's just very centering.
Yeah.
I think for the reasons that you're describing right here. Yeah.
So powerful.
Yeah. This has been a fantastic conversation. Troy can be found at troyhadeed.com, and all those, that and the other places you can find and follow him will be in today's show notes. And again, I just thank you so much for your time and your willingness to share some of your experiences that help us connect to something that I think for the most part, we kind of just want to not think about connecting to. But you have reminded us today with your example and your teaching how important it is and what we're missing, I think, when we don't create space to connect with ourselves and with our Creator in ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a delight. And thank you, friend, for listening. Until next time, peace.
Love.
Before we press record, Troy asked if he could call me Ange. Now, there aren't too many people who call me Ange, but I said yes before I even really thought about it because Troy just shows up with a desire to engage and connect and love and share. I knew right away this conversation was going to be one that messed with me. And it has. I'm still thinking about the silence and why practicing it is so hard for me. What am I afraid of? What do I think I will see or learn when I listen to myself and to the whispers of my Heavenly Father? Hear our verse again, John 1:12 from the Message. But whoever did want him, who believed he was who he claimed and would do what he said, he made to be their true selves, their child of God selves. Thank you, Troy, for allowing God to use you to point us right back to him. Next week, our Take It In verse will be Psalm 1:3 that reminds us that a tree planted by water doesn't wither. And my guest will be Christian comedian and Bible study author Amberly Neese. Amberly will be with us to talk about the importance of asking questions of God and how doing so can keep us connected to God. If you haven't yet, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe or follow the podcast on whatever directory you're using to listen. It only takes a second and it guarantees you'll see new episodes as soon as they drop. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.